Hello, my sleepy friends. Imagine you arrive not as a hero from a film, but as an ordinary traveler stepping down from a slow wagon after weeks of dust and rattling wheels. The land stretches farther than you expected. There are no crowded streets, no nearby shops, and no immediate shelter except a few scattered wooden buildings standing under a wide sky. The Wild West was not a constant gunfight. It was distance. It was isolation. And survival depended less on bravery and more on patience and preparation. The first thing you would notice is silence. In cities, noise fills every hour, but here the air feels empty. Wind moves through dry grass. A horse shifts its weight nearby. Somewhere far away, a hammer strikes wood as someone repairs a structure. This silence matters because help is not close. If something breaks, you fix it. If you run out of food, you solve it. No one arrives quickly in emergencies. The greatest danger of the frontier was not violence. It was being alone when something went wrong. Water becomes your first concern. In the Wild West, survival began with knowing where water existed before you needed it. Settlements were built near rivers, creeks, or springs for a reason. Travelers carried canteens, but they also memorized landmarks. A particular hill, a group of trees, a bend in the ground, signs that water might be nearby. Without water, a person weakened quickly under the sun. People planned journeys carefully, moving early in the morning or late in the day to avoid heat. Midday was often spent resting in shade because exhaustion could become dangerous long before hunger. Food required effort rather than purchase. You could not assume daily supplies. Flour, beans, and dried meat were common because they lasted long and traveled well. Cooking was simple. A pot over a fire, bread baked in a pan, coffee boiled repeatedly. Fresh food was rare unless you hunted or traded. Hunting required knowledge, not only how to aim, but how to preserve. Meat had to be salted or smoked quickly or it spoiled. Nothing was wasted because replacement was uncertain. Shelter was equally important. A house in the frontier was not comfort. It was protection. It kept out weather, animals, and cold nights that surprised newcomers who expected only heat. Even summer evenings could become sharply cool once the sun disappeared. People sealed cracks in walls with mud, stacked wood for sudden storms, and secured roofs carefully because repairs were difficult once darkness came. Fireplaces were essential, not decorative. Fire meant warmth, cooking, and sometimes safety from animals. Travel itself was slow and cautious. A horse was valuable not only for speed but for survival. You cared for the animal as carefully as yourself because without it, distance became overwhelming. Saddles were checked daily, hooves cleaned, and rest given regularly. Injuring a horse miles from a town could leave a person stranded with supplies too heavy to carry. Many travelers planned routes from ranch to ranch, knowing where assistance might be possible. Law existed but was thinly spread. A sheriff might oversee a large area, and reaching him could take hours or days. Because of this, communities depended heavily on cooperation. Neighbors helped each other build structures, repair wagons, and share supplies during shortages. Reputation mattered. Someone known to be reliable received help. Someone reckless might find doors closed. Social survival was as important as physical survival. Weather was unpredictable and often underestimated. Sudden storms could flood rivers and trap travelers. Dust storms reduced visibility to almost nothing. Winter brought cold strong enough to freeze water supplies overnight. People watched the sky constantly, reading clouds and wind direction the way sailors read the sea. Experience taught them to prepare early rather than react late. Disease was another silent danger. Minor injuries could become serious without quick treatment. A cut from a tool or fall from a horse required cleaning and care immediately because doctors were far away. People kept basic remedies, boiled water for washing wounds, and relied on practical knowledge passed through communities. Cleanliness was not luxury, it was prevention. Most importantly, survival depended on mindset. The Wild West rewarded steady thinking. Panic wasted energy and made problems worse. Those who survived were not always the strongest or fastest, but the most consistent. Individuals who repaired tools before they broke, stored food before winter, and rested before exhaustion. Life was not dramatic. It was continuous effort. As evening settles over the open land, the sky turns wide and dark, with stars far brighter than any city could show. A small fire burns steadily, coffee warms in a metal cup, and the long quiet returns. In this world, survival comes from attention, routine, and respect for distance. The frontier was not a place conquered in a day. It was a place endured patiently, where each sunrise meant another chance to prepare well enough to see the next one. After a few days on the frontier, you would begin to understand that distance was only one challenge. The land itself demanded attention every hour. Out here, the ground could help you live or quietly defeat you, depending on how carefully you observed it. People who lasted longest in the Wild West were not the quickest shooters or the loudest men in saloons. They were the ones who learned to notice small details: the direction grass leaned in the wind, the color of soil beneath their boots, and the behavior of animals moving across the open range. Morning began early because daylight was valuable. Before the sun rose fully, settlers stepped outside to feel the air. A cold morning in summer meant a clear day ahead. A warm breeze before sunrise suggested weather might change. This daily observation guided decisions, whether to travel, work the fields, repair a fence, or remain close to shelter. The sky became a kind of calendar, and the land itself was a guidebook written without words. Fire was central to survival. Starting a fire was never taken for granted because matches were limited and flint tools wore down. People carried tinder carefully. Dry grass, paper, or small wood shavings kept protected from moisture. A well-kept fire meant hot food, boiled water, and light after sunset. Many travelers never fully extinguished coals at night, but covered them with ash so they could be revived easily in the morning. Saving effort mattered as much as creating it. Water again required constant awareness. Rivers looked reliable, but not all water was safe to drink immediately. Boiling became routine. It took time and fuel, yet illness from unsafe water could weaken a person more quickly than hunger. Settlers learned to recognize clearer streams, avoid stagnant pools, and store water in shaded containers to keep it usable longer. Every trip away from camp began with checking the canteen, because returning unexpectedly late was always possible. Animals played a larger role than many imagined. Livestock meant food and trade, but also responsibility. Cattle needed protection from weather and wandering. Horses needed rest and steady feeding. At night, animals were often kept close because predators moved quietly after dark. Listening became a skill. A sudden silence in insects or a nervous movement in horses warned that something approached. Often it was harmless, yet paying attention prevented loss. Travelers rarely moved alone if they could avoid it. Wagon groups formed for safety and practicality. A broken wheel required several people to lift and repair. Crossing rivers needed planning and shared effort. Even simple tasks like gathering firewood were easier with company. Community was not merely friendly, it was protective. People learned quickly that independence did not mean isolation. Cooperation increased survival chances for everyone. Clothing mattered more than appearance. Wide hats shielded sun, heavy boots protected feet from rough ground, and layered garments handled both hot days and cold nights. Dust covered everything, and washing was infrequent due to limited water, but clean fabric near the skin still helped prevent sores and illness. Practical clothing became equipment rather than fashion. Food preparation followed routine. Beans soaked overnight softened enough to cook quickly the next day, saving fuel. Bread baked in a cast iron pan became a dependable meal. Coffee was brewed repeatedly from the same grounds because supplies had to last. Eating regularly mattered. Skipping meals weakened strength needed for daily labor. Hunger was managed carefully rather than ignored. Evenings brought a different pace. Work stopped before darkness because light was limited. Tools were stored properly, wagons secured, and animals checked. After that came rest. People gathered near the fire not for entertainment alone, but to share information, road conditions, weather signs, or news of distant settlements. Knowledge traveled by conversation, and listening carefully could prevent future mistakes. Gradually, a person realized the Wild West did not reward speed. It rewarded rhythm. Each day followed preparation, observation, work, and rest. Survival depended on repeating these steps consistently. The land could be harsh, yet it was predictable if respected. Those who ignored its patterns struggled. Those who adapted lasted. As night spreads across the plains again, stars appear one by one above the dark horizon. The fire burns low, horses settle nearby, and the air cools quickly after sunset. Tomorrow will require the same careful routine, water gathered, tools checked, and paths chosen wisely. Out here, living was not about conquering the frontier. It was about understanding it well enough to remain another day beneath its endless sky. After you spent enough time in the frontier, you would slowly learn that the greatest danger was not a sudden event, but small mistakes repeated over days. The Wild West did not defeat people quickly. It wore them down quietly. A loose bootlace that caused a stumble, a forgotten tool left in the sun, a meal skipped because you felt too tired. Each small error made the next day harder. Survival depended on routine so steady it almost felt boring, and boredom itself was actually safety. Morning tasks always began with checking. You also learned quickly to respect the sun. The open plains had little shade and the sky stretched wide without buildings or trees to soften the heat. Travelers moved slowly during the hottest hours, resting beside rocks or wagons. Wide hats, neckcloths, and long sleeves were not only clothing but protection. Water was sipped steadily rather than drunk all at once. Drinking too quickly meant finishing supplies too early, and thirst later became dangerous. Those who survived paced themselves carefully, understanding that energy was limited. Navigation required attention. Trails were not always clear roads, but faint paths worn by wagons and animals. Landmarks mattered more than signs. A distant mountain peak, a crooked tree, or a bend in a river. People memorized these features before traveling far. Getting lost rarely meant dramatic wandering. It meant gradual confusion, walking extra miles and exhausting supplies before reaching the next settlement. For this reason, experienced travelers paused often, turning back to look behind them so they could recognize the path when returning. Night introduced a different challenge. Darkness arrived quickly after sunset, and without city lights, the land became nearly black. Fires were kept small and controlled, both to conserve fuel and to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Animals were tied securely, wagons positioned to block wind, and supplies stored away from curious wildlife. Sleep came lightly. A sudden sound, a horse shifting, a coyote call, or wind hitting the wagon cover, would wake a careful traveler immediately. Not out of fear, but out of habit formed by necessity. Weather could change plans without warning. A clear morning sometimes ended in sudden rain, turning roads to mud. Wagons became heavy, and wheels stuck easily. Travelers learned patience during such times. Instead of forcing movement and damaging equipment, they waited. Waiting was part of survival. Impatience caused accidents more often than storms themselves. Social life also influenced survival more than newcomers expected. In frontier towns, a person's behavior determined future help. Someone who paid fairly, worked honestly, and spoke respectfully built a reputation that traveled faster than any horse. Later, when help was needed, repairing a wagon, finding a lost animal, or sharing supplies, others responded willingly. Reputation became a form of protection stronger than weapons. Medical care was limited, so prevention mattered. A blister on the foot was treated early because walking long distances worsened it quickly. Hands were wrapped during heavy labor to avoid infection. Boiled water cleaned wounds even when it seemed unnecessary. These habits prevented minor injuries from becoming serious problems. People learned to act immediately rather than wait. Over time, you would realize the Wild West rewarded awareness of As evening settles once again across the open land, the long grass moves gently in the cooling air. The day's work ends quietly, tools cleaned and stored, animals resting close to camp. A small fire flickers, giving light enough to see but not enough to waste fuel. Tomorrow will bring the same routine, and in that repetition lies survival. Not in dramatic moments, but in the calm discipline of doing ordinary things correctly every single day beneath the wide, unbroken sky. After some weeks on the frontier, you would begin to understand that towns themselves were part of survival. At first, a settlement might look small and unimpressive, a few wooden buildings, a water trough for horses, a general store, and perhaps a blacksmith shop sending sparks into the air. Yet these places were lifelines. Between vast distances of open land, a town meant repair, news, and rest. A traveler did not pass through carelessly. Arrival required planning because what you did here determined how safely you could leave again. The first stop was usually water for the horse. A rider knew that a tired or thirsty animal made every mile harder. Only after the horse was cared for did the rider think of personal needs. This habit was learned quickly on the frontier. Your survival and the animal's survival were connected. A well-rested horse meant the ability to reach shelter before nightfall or outrun sudden weather. People spoke gently to their animals, brushed dust from coats, and checked hooves carefully before continuing. Inside the general store you would find not abundance but essentials: flour, beans, coffee, salt, and sometimes simple tools. Supplies were expensive because they had traveled long distances by wagon. Buyers thought carefully before purchasing. Every item carried weight in a saddlebag or wagon, and carrying too much slowed travel. Settlers chose only what they truly needed. Coffee, for example, was valued not only for comfort, but because warm drink encouraged hydration and lifted tired spirits after long days. The blacksmith shop was one of the most important buildings in any town. The steady ringing of hammer on metal meant survival for travelers. A broken horseshoe or damaged wagon part could end a journey if not repaired. People waited patiently for their turn, watching sparks rise in the dim interior as iron was shaped. Repairs were not rushed. A strong fix prevented miles of hardship later, so careful work mattered more than speed. Information traveled through conversation. There were no quick messages from distant regions, so travelers listened closely to others passing through. Someone might mention a river running high, a trail washed out, or a storm moving across the plains. These simple exchanges guided decisions more than maps ever could. A wise traveler stayed long enough to learn conditions ahead, rather than leaving immediately. Even rest required planning. Sleeping indoors for a night allowed real recovery. Wagons could be inspected properly, clothing cleaned, and wounds treated. Bathing was rare but valuable when possible, because dust and sweat caused illness over time. People understood that rest was not wasted time. It prepared them for the next long stretch of travel. Law in such towns was practical. A sheriff or marshal might be present, but order often depended on mutual understanding. Most people wanted peace because conflict disrupted trade and safety. Arguments were settled quickly, and strangers behaved carefully until known. Respect was not simply politeness. It protected you from trouble in a place where everyone depended on each other. As departure approached, preparation became quiet and deliberate. Water containers were filled completely, tools packed carefully, and routes reviewed once more. Leaving a settlement without checking every detail risked unnecessary hardship. Travelers often rose before sunrise to begin again in the cool air, leading horses slowly until both rider and animal warmed into motion. Stepping back onto the open land after a night in town felt different. The same wide sky stretched overhead, yet now you carried repaired equipment, fresh supplies, and new knowledge of the road ahead. The frontier still required effort, but preparation gave confidence. Survival was not a single action. It was a chain of small, careful decisions made day after day. As the town disappears behind you and the prairie opens once more, The rhythm returns, hooves striking earth steadily, wind moving through tall grass, and the distant horizon waiting patiently. In the Wild West, towns were brief pauses in a long journey, but those pauses made the journey possible, allowing each traveler to continue safely across land that rewarded caution, cooperation, and steady persistence. Once you were far Tracking was not only a skill used by hunters or lawmen. Ordinary settlers paid attention to tracks because they explained the environment. Fresh hoofprints might mean other travelers were near. Wagon ruts could guide you toward a road, and animal tracks suggested water somewhere ahead. Deer and antelope rarely wandered far from drinking sources. When the ground showed many animals crossing the same direction repeatedly, careful travelers followed slowly, knowing such paths often led to streams or springs hidden beyond low hills. Midday heat required discipline. The plains did not always feel hot at sunrise, but as the sun climbed, the air changed quickly. Experienced travelers stopped pushing forward when shadows shortened beneath them. Instead, they rested under the wagon's shade or beside a rock formation, letting both body and horse recover. Moving constantly in heat, exhausted water supplies and weakened judgment. The strongest people were not those who marched endlessly, but those who paused wisely. Cooking was simple yet important. A small fire was enough, built carefully so fuel was not wasted. Dry branches collected earlier in the day were used sparingly. A pot of beans simmered slowly, and bread cooked in a pan or wrapped in cloth near coals. The meal was plain but steady, and eating regularly mattered more than taste. Hunger made people careless, and carelessness on the frontier often led to injury. Even the choice of campsite was thoughtful. Travelers did not stop randomly at sunset. They looked for ground slightly higher than surrounding land to avoid sudden water flow if rain arrived overnight. They avoided dry riverbeds, which could flood unexpectedly miles away from a storm. Wind direction was considered so smoke did not blow into sleeping areas. Wagons were positioned to block cold air, and animals were tied where they could graze but not wander. Night sounds became familiar over time. Coyotes called in the distance, insects filled the darkness with steady noise, and horses shifted softly nearby. These sounds, once unsettling, grew reassuring because they meant the world was behaving normally. Silence, oddly, was more concerning. When animals grew quiet, travelers became alert, sensing something unusual nearby, often a passing predator or approaching weather. Sleep came in intervals. One person might rest while another remained lightly awake, listening and watching the horizon. This was not constant fear, but habit formed by responsibility. A sudden storm, a loose animal, or a stray ember from the fire could create trouble quickly. Gentle awareness prevented problems from growing larger. Morning again began with simple repetition, checking hooves, tightening harness straps, packing supplies in the same order each day so nothing was forgotten. Familiar routine saved time and prevented mistakes. Over many days, these repeated actions became automatic. The frontier rewarded consistency more than strength. Gradually, as dusk settles again over the open prairie and the last light stretches long across the grass, the wagon stands quiet beside a small controlled fire. The horse lowers its head to feed, the sky darkens slowly, and the stars return in great numbers overhead. In this stillness you understand the true lesson of the Wild West. Survival did not come from conquering the land, but from living gently within it, learning its patterns, and repeating steady habits until each sunrise simply followed the last. After many days of travel across open country, one of the most important lessons slowly revealed itself. Weather controlled everything. On the frontier, you did not make plans and expect the land to follow them. Instead, you watched the sky and adjusted your life around it. The sky became your calendar, your warning system, and sometimes your only protection. Morning clouds told stories if you looked carefully. High, thin clouds drifting slowly often meant clear weather would hold. Darker clouds gathering low on the horizon meant you prepared early. People packed supplies tightly, checked wagon covers, and secured tools before trouble arrived. Waiting until rain began was already too late because wet ground turned trails into heavy mud, trapping wheels and exhausting animals. Rain itself was not always dangerous, but sudden water was. Dry ground could not absorb heavy storms quickly, and streams that appeared harmless in the afternoon could rise by nightfall. Travelers learned never to camp near riverbanks even when the water seemed calm. Flooding often came silently from distant rainfall unseen beyond hills. Those who chose higher ground slept safely, while those who ignored elevation sometimes woke to water moving around their wagons. Wind brought another challenge. Strong prairie winds carried dust that filled eyes and lungs and covered supplies with grit. During such days, people wrapped cloth over their faces and reduced movement. Continuing travel blindly wasted energy and risked losing direction. Patience again proved valuable. Waiting for calmer air often saved miles of unnecessary wandering. Winter changed the land completely. Cold arrived faster than newcomers expected. Nights froze water containers, and morning tasks required breaking thin ice before cooking. Fires became larger and wood more precious. People gathered fuel whenever they could, storing it carefully against moisture. A well-prepared camp meant warmth and cooked meals. An unprepared one meant long, uncomfortable nights and weakening bodies. Snow itself was not always the hardest part. Wind across snow created drifting patterns that hid trails and landmarks. Without clear reference points, travelers risked moving in circles. For this reason, experienced settlers marked their paths, stacking stones, tying cloth to branches, or memorizing distant rock formations. Careful navigation mattered more than speed in such conditions. Storms taught humility. Even the strongest rider could not outrun a blizzard or heavy rain across open plains. When weather turned severe, the safest decision was often to stop and secure camp rather than push forward. Wagons were positioned against the wind, animals sheltered behind them, and fires protected carefully. Waiting felt slow, but survival favored stillness over motion during danger. Heat returned with spring and summer, bringing a different threat. Dehydration came quietly. Travelers carried water not just for thirst but for safety, and they rationed carefully. Drinking small amounts regularly kept strength steady. Exhaustion was treated early with rest rather than ignored. People who tried to hurry across the plains often found themselves weaker by evening than those who moved slowly. Animals also reacted to weather before humans noticed. Horses became restless before storms, cattle grouped together against wind, and birds changed flight patterns. Observing these signs gave extra warning. Frontier living depended on attention not only to the sky, but to every living thing within it. Through these experiences, a traveler learned that surviving the Wild West was less about courage and more about listening. The land spoke through clouds, wind, and temperature. Those who paid attention lived comfortably enough. Those who ignored signs faced hardship. As night comes once more and the air cools gently after a long day, the camp settles into quiet routine. The fire is placed where wind cannot scatter sparks, supplies are covered, and animals rest close. Above, the sky stretches clear and full of stars again. Tomorrow's journey will depend not on desire but on conditions, and in accepting that truth, a person truly begins to live safely within the wide and patient land of the frontier. After enough weeks on the frontier, you would realize that survival depended as much on other people as on the land itself. The Wild West was wide and quiet, yet no one truly lived alone for long. Trails crossed eventually, wagons met at rivers, and riders shared camps when night approached. Cooperation formed naturally because distance was too great and danger too constant for complete isolation. A stranger seen at sunset was rarely treated as an enemy first, but as potential help because tomorrow you might be the one in need. Meeting another traveler followed an unspoken pattern. Both riders approached slowly, hands visible, voices calm. Conversation came before questions about business. People spoke about the road behind them, where water could be found, where grass was healthy for animals, where a broken bridge forced a longer path. This exchange of information mattered more than money. Knowledge was the most valuable supply carried across the plains. Shared camps were common when routes aligned. Wagons positioned in a loose circle created a sense of safety and kept animals close. Fires burned in the center, meals cooked together, and watch duties quietly divided. No formal agreement was written, yet everyone understood the responsibility. One person stayed awake for part of the night, then another took the role. Rest came easier, knowing someone was listening to the darkness while others slept. Trust formed slowly but meaningfully. A traveler who behaved honestly gained companions again on future journeys. News spread quietly from settlement to settlement about reliable individuals. The careful blacksmith, the fair trader, the family willing to share extra water. Reputation traveled faster than horses, and it shaped how strangers were greeted long before they met. Even in small frontier towns, people relied heavily on each other. A barn raising, for example, was never a single family's work. Neighbors arrived with tools and food, lifting heavy beams together in one day rather than weeks. In return, the helped family offered assistance later. This pattern of mutual effort made survival possible in places where professional builders or services were far away. Traveling groups also formed temporarily for difficult routes. Crossing deserts or mountain passes alone was risky, so wagons gathered into caravans. Together they shared supplies, repaired equipment collectively, and watched over animals at night. Larger groups did not move quickly, but they moved safely, and safety mattered more than speed. Disagreements occurred, of course, yet they were often settled quietly. Conflict wasted energy and threatened survival. People valued calm discussion and compromise because living in anger far from support made everyday tasks harder. Cooperation allowed everyone to continue their journey without unnecessary hardship. Children grew up learning these habits early. They carried water, gathered fuel, and observed adults working together. Responsibility was taught not through strict rules but through participation. Every person, even the youngest, had a small role. This shared effort created a strong sense of belonging and purpose. Gradually, you would understand that the frontier was not conquered by individuals, but by communities forming briefly wherever paths crossed. Camps, caravans, and settlements were connected by simple kindnesses. A shared meal, directions given, a tool loaned and returned. These small acts built a network of support across vast distance. As another evening settles and several wagons rest side by side beneath fading light, quiet conversation drifts through the cooling air. A kettle warms above gentle coals, horses graze nearby, and voices remain calm and unhurried. Under the wide sky, survival feels less like a struggle and more like a shared routine, carried forward by cooperation and steady trust among travelers moving together across the open land. By this point in your journey, you would begin to understand that food itself was a daily responsibility, not a simple comfort. Out on the frontier, there were no markets nearby once you left a settlement, and meals depended entirely on preparation and awareness. Travelers did not eat whenever hunger appeared. They planned meals hours in advance, sometimes even a full day ahead, because cooking required fuel, water, and time. Every bite of food had traveled far with you, and wasting it meant risking weakness later. Flour was one of the most valuable supplies carried across the plains. It could become bread, thick porridge, or simple biscuits cooked in a pan over coals. A small sack was guarded carefully against moisture because rain or river crossings could ruin it instantly. Beans were equally important. They stored well, lasted long, and filled the stomach even after a day of heavy work. Cooking them required patience, often soaking and simmering slowly through the evening while other chores were completed. Meat was less dependable than many imagine. Hunting happened when possible, but ammunition was limited, and animals were not always nearby. A successful hunt provided welcome variety, yet people never relied on it. Dried meat carried from towns was more dependable, cut into thin strips and preserved carefully. It was eaten slowly, a little at a time, often mixed with beans or bread so it lasted longer. Water mattered more than food. Travelers watched rivers, creeks, and natural springs closely on their route. They filled containers whenever a reliable source appeared, even if supplies seemed full. Clean water was sometimes boiled before drinking, especially when collected from still pools. Illness from unsafe water weakened a person quickly and made travel difficult. So careful habits developed. Refill early, boil when uncertain, and never pass a good water source without stopping. Cooking itself followed routine. A shallow pit was made for the fire, shielding it from wind. Stones were arranged to hold pots steady. After meals, ashes were covered so stray embers did not start grass fires. These habits protected both camp and surrounding land. Fire was useful but respected, always controlled and never left unattended. Storage also required thought. Food was kept elevated or sealed to discourage animals. Even small creatures could chew through bags overnight. Supplies were packed consistently in the wagon so they could be found quickly in low light. Order prevented mistakes when darkness fell or sudden rain forced hurried packing. Travelers learned Gradually, you would notice that meals became moments of calm within long days. After travel and chores ended, people gathered near the fire quietly. Conversation stayed gentle, often about routes, weather, or plans for the next morning. The steady act of cooking, stirring a pot, or baking bread provided comfort beyond nutrition. It marked the end of effort and the beginning of rest. As night deepens and the small fire glows steadily, the scent of simple food drifts through the cooling air. Tin cups are set aside, tools cleaned, and supplies packed again for morning. The meal is finished, not extravagant but enough. In the Wild West, survival often depended not on dramatic events but on these ordinary routines repeated faithfully. Each careful meal helping you greet another sunrise beneath the wide, quiet sky. After many weeks moving across open land, you would slowly learn that the greatest threat was not always hunger or weather, but injury. The frontier offered no nearby doctor most of the time, and even small wounds required attention. Survival depended on prevention first and treatment immediately after any accident, because a minor problem ignored today could become serious within days. Daily work itself created risk. Chopping wood, lifting wagon parts, riding long hours, or handling animals all demanded care. People wrapped their hands with cloth when using tools so blisters did not form. A blister might seem harmless, yet on the frontier, sore hands meant you could not grip reins properly or repair equipment. So hands were checked each evening and cleaned before rest. Foot care mattered just as much. Boots were worn for long distances and dust collected inside them easily. Each night travelers removed footwear, shook out sand, and inspected their feet. A small sore was washed and covered quickly. Walking on untreated wounds slowed travel and caused exhaustion. Careful habits kept strength steady for the next day. If a cut happened, it was cleaned immediately, often with boiled water once it cooled. Cloth strips were kept for bandaging, and people avoided touching wounds with dirty hands. Infection was feared not dramatically but realistically. Without treatment available nearby, prevention was the safest approach. Cleanliness, even in simple form, protected health. Muscle strain was another common difficulty. Riding and lifting could tire the body beyond comfort. Instead of forcing work through pain, experienced settlers rested briefly, stretching stiff limbs and resuming slowly. Overexertion caused weakness later, and weakness reduced awareness. Resting early preserved energy better than pushing forward. Sickness also required patience. If someone developed fever or exhaustion, travel slowed or stopped entirely for a time. Camps were set longer than planned so recovery could happen. Groups understood this necessity because leaving a weakened person behind was unthinkable. Cooperation extended to health, with others sharing tasks while the ill rested. Sun exposure was treated carefully. Hats, long sleeves, and neck cloths shielded skin. Travelers drank water steadily to prevent dizziness. Shade was used whenever possible during midday heat. Simple protection prevented headaches and fatigue that might impair judgment while riding or handling tools. Animals were treated similarly. A horse with a sore hoof or injury meant danger for the rider too. Hooves were cleaned, checked for stones, and shoes adjusted regularly. Rest days were given when animals showed signs of strain. Caring for animals was not kindness alone, but shared survival. Gradually, you would realize the frontier rewarded awareness of the body. People paid attention to small signals: tired eyes, aching muscles, slower reactions. Addressing these early avoided larger problems. Strength on the frontier was not pushing beyond limits, but recognizing them. As evening returns and the camp grows quiet once more, bandages are tied, boots set beside blankets, and hands cleaned before sleep. The fire burns low and steady while stars appear overhead. Another day ends without incident, not because danger never existed, but because careful attention prevented it from growing. On the frontier, safety came from steady habits practiced daily beneath the calm and endless night sky. By now you would notice that time itself felt different on the frontier. Days were not measured by clocks, but by light. Sunrise meant preparation, midday meant caution, and sunset meant securing everything carefully before darkness settled across the land. Without lamps bright enough to fill the night, people depended on routine more than schedule. Missing a task before nightfall created unnecessary risk, because once darkness covered the plains, even simple work became difficult. Evening preparation always began before the sun fully disappeared. Wagons were turned so their sides faced the wind, blankets were unrolled early, and tools were gathered in one place so they could be found quickly if needed. Horses were brushed to remove sweat and dust, because leaving them damp in cooling air weakened them by morning. Saddles were lifted off and placed under cover to keep leather from stiffening overnight. Water was also handled carefully at dusk. Containers were filled while visibility remained clear, since walking to a stream in darkness risked stumbling or losing direction. Travelers learned never to leave camp far at night unless necessary. The land looked familiar in daylight but became confusing under starlight. Even experienced riders preferred to wait for morning before moving long distances again. Firelight created a small circle of comfort in the open land. The fire was not large. Large fires wasted fuel and could spread into dry grass. Instead, people built low, steady flames, enough to cook and provide warmth. Around this light, the day quietly ended. Equipment was inspected one final time. Wagon wheels tightened, ropes checked, and supplies covered against dew. These repeated checks prevented morning surprises. Night watch often rotated among companions. One person remained lightly awake for a while, listening more than looking. The plains carried sound far, the movement of hooves, shifting cattle, or wind approaching from distant hills. Listening allowed early reaction if animals became restless or weather changed suddenly. After some time, another person took the watch, and the first rested. No announcement was needed. The routine developed naturally. Sleep itself was simple. Blankets were laid close to the wagon or fire where ground was level. Boots were kept within reach in case quick movement was required. Weapons, tools, and lanterns were placed where hands could find them easily without searching. These arrangements were quiet precautions, not constant worry, and they allowed deeper rest. Morning always began early. Before sunrise, a faint blue light spread across the horizon and camp slowly stirred. Coffee or warm drink was prepared first, not as luxury, but as gentle wakefulness. People spoke softly, avoiding rushed movement while minds cleared. Afterward, animals were watered and fed before anyone ate. This order never changed because a strong animal made the day's travel easier. Packing followed a practiced pattern. Each item returned to the same place every day so nothing was forgotten. Blankets rolled tightly, cooking tools cleaned, and fire fully extinguished. Ashes were scattered and ground checked to ensure no embers remained. Leaving a safe campsite was part of respect for the land and also prevented accidental fires behind them. Travel began in cool morning air while strength was highest. Wheels rolled steadily, hooves struck rhythmically, and the horizon slowly approached again. The previous night's preparation now showed its value. No delays, no missing supplies, no injured animals. The day started smoothly because the evening had been careful. Gradually, you would understand that survival on the frontier depended on ending each day correctly, as much as beginning it well. The quiet discipline of evening routines protected tomorrow's journey. Nothing dramatic occurred, yet safety grew from repetition. As the sun rises fully and golden light spreads across the grasslands, the wagon moves forward once more. Behind you, the campsite leaves almost no trace, only flattened grass and cooled ashes. Ahead lies another long stretch of open country, and with steady habits guiding each action, you continue safely across the vast and patient landscape of the Wild West. After many months on the frontier, survival stopped feeling like a daily struggle and began to feel like a quiet understanding between you and the land. The Wild West did not become easier, but you became steadier. The wide plains, the shifting sky, the long trails, they no longer felt overwhelming. They felt familiar. And familiarity was one of the strongest forms of protection a person could have in such an open world. You would notice how your senses had sharpened without you realizing it. The smell of rain arrived before the clouds darkened. The tone of wind changed slightly before a storm gathered strength. The way your horse moved beneath you told you whether it felt strong or tired long before it slowed. Survival was no longer a list of tasks. It was awareness woven into each movement. You also began to understand distance differently. What once seemed impossibly far now felt manageable, because you had learned to break it into parts. A journey across open prairie was not conquered in a single effort. It was divided into water stops, rest periods, shaded pauses, and evening camps. Thinking in smaller sections prevented exhaustion. The land remained vast, but your approach to it became measured and patient. Conflict, when it appeared, was often avoided rather than confronted. The frontier held many personalities: ranchers, traders, miners, travelers. Yet most people valued stability. Trouble interrupted business, and business meant survival. Respectful speech, calm gestures, and clear intentions solved more problems than force ever could. Knowing when to step away was as important as knowing how to stand firm. On the frontier, wisdom was quieter than pride. You would also come to respect the seasons fully. Spring brought muddy trails and swollen rivers that required careful crossing. Summer meant heat and long daylight hours for travel, balanced by midday rest. Autumn offered cooler air and better grazing for animals, while winter demanded preparation long before it arrived. Each season changed strategy. People who prepared early, storing supplies, repairing shelters, gathering fuel, faced fewer surprises when weather shifted suddenly. Even loneliness, which once felt heavy, softened over time. The silence of open country became peaceful rather than empty. Watching sunrise across endless grassland no longer seemed isolating but grounding. You realized that survival here required comfort with stillness. The land did not entertain or distract, it simply existed. And in accepting that quiet presence, you found steadiness within yourself. Gradually, the habits you practiced every day, checking equipment, rationing water, reading the sky, cooperating with others, became natural. You no longer thought about them consciously. They flowed automatically, protecting you without effort. That was the true sign of adaptation. The frontier had not changed, but you had adjusted to its rhythm. As evening returns once more and the horizon glows softly under fading light, your camp is arranged with quiet precision. The horse stands calm, supplies are secure, and a small fire warms the cooling air. There is no rush, no panic, no unnecessary movement. The Wild West remains wide and untamed, yet within your steady routine there is balance. Survival here was never about conquering the land or proving strength. It was about understanding patterns, respecting distance, cooperating with others, and moving patiently day after day. Under the vast sky filled with stars, you rest not as someone fighting the frontier, but as someone who has learned to live within it, steadily, carefully, and with quiet confidence beneath the endless western night. With time, you would begin to understand that rivers were among the most important and most dangerous parts of frontier travel. On a map, a river looked simple, a thin line crossing the land, but in reality it controlled routes, determined settlements, and often decided whether a journey continued or ended. Every traveler approached water slowly and with patience, because rushing a crossing caused more accidents than any other mistake on the trail. Long before reaching the riverbank, experienced travelers stopped and observed. They watched the speed of the current by throwing a small stick into the water and following it with their eyes. If it moved quickly, the crossing required greater care or even delay. They studied the color of the water as well. Clear water usually meant a shallow and stable bottom, while dark, cloudy water often hid soft mud that could trap wheels or hooves. Nothing was done immediately. Waiting and watching came first. Wagons were prepared carefully. Heavy items were repositioned to keep balance steady, and anything easily damaged by water was wrapped or lifted higher. Sometimes wheels were reinforced with extra bindings, so the force of water would not loosen them. People did not simply drive forward. They walked beside the wagon, guiding it step by step, feeling the riverbed beneath their boots. This slow movement prevented sudden drops where the ground sloped unexpectedly. Horses and animals were treated gently during crossings. They sensed moving water and often hesitated. Pulling them quickly created panic, so riders spoke calmly and allowed them to enter gradually. A frightened animal could stumble, and one stumble could overturn a wagon. Patience again proved stronger than speed. After crossing, travelers did not immediately continue. They rested nearby, checking everything thoroughly. Wet leather was dried, supplies inspected, and animals allowed to recover. Crossing a river took energy from both people and animals, and moving forward too soon risked fatigue. A short pause preserved strength for the miles ahead. Bridges, when found, were Water also offered benefits beyond travel. Rivers meant fresh drinking water, grass for animals, and sometimes fish for food. Camps near water were pleasant yet chosen wisely. High ground was always preferred to avoid sudden rising water overnight. Firewood was gathered before dark so no one needed to search far after sunset. Over months of experience, you would come to see rivers not as obstacles but as reminders of caution. They rewarded attention and punished haste. Every safe crossing reinforced the lesson that progress on the frontier came from steady decisions rather than bold attempts. As dusk settles beside a quiet flowing stream and the sound of water moves gently through the evening air, your camp rests peacefully. The wagon stands dry, animals drink calmly, and supplies remain secure. The journey continues not through force, but through patience, each careful crossing guiding you farther across the wide and enduring landscape of the Wild West. As the journey continued farther west, you would eventually discover that the land did not always remain open prairie. The ground slowly began to change. Grass grew shorter, the air became drier, and long stretches appeared where trees disappeared entirely from the horizon. This was where true caution deepened, because here the greatest challenge was not distance or storms, but emptiness. The frontier sometimes offered miles where no water, shelter, or settlement existed, and survival depended on preparation made long before entering such country. Before crossing these dry regions, travelers spent extra time in the last settlement they encountered. Water containers were filled beyond comfort, sometimes tied to both sides of wagons or saddles. Every drop mattered. People did not rely on finding water ahead. They assumed none existed. Even clothing was adjusted. Loose fabric, wide hats, and neck coverings shielded skin from the sun that seemed harsher in these open areas. Movement began early each morning, while air remained cool because midday travel drained strength quickly. The pace slowed intentionally. Moving too fast created thirst faster than water could be rationed. Travelers developed a steady walking rhythm rather than constant riding. Horses were protected carefully, rested often, and allowed to graze whenever sparse vegetation appeared. A weakened animal endangered everyone, so riders sometimes walked beside them for miles, conserving the animal's energy for emergencies. Navigation became especially important. Without trees or large landmarks, direction depended on sun position and memory of terrain. People studied the land carefully before entering it, memorizing distant hills or rock shapes visible on the horizon. At night, the stars guided orientation, and experienced travelers checked their path often to prevent drifting unknowingly off course. A wrong direction here did not mean a short delay. It could mean losing precious water before reaching safety. Midday heat demanded strict routine. Travel often stopped completely for several hours. Wagons were positioned to cast shade, blankets hung to block sunlight, and everyone rested quietly. Speaking less, moving less, and conserving energy preserved moisture in the body. Drinking occurred slowly and regularly, never all at once. This discipline prevented exhaustion and dizziness. Dust storms occasionally Night, however, brought relief. After sunset, the temperature dropped and the sky filled with stars more numerous than seen anywhere else. Travelers often resumed movement for a time under moonlight, taking advantage of cooler air. The land seemed peaceful then, quiet and silver beneath the night sky. Yet even during these gentle hours, awareness remained. Routes were followed carefully so morning would find them still moving in the right direction. Food was eaten lightly during these crossings because digestion required water. Simple bread, small portions of dried meat, and careful rationing maintained strength without draining supplies. Cooking fires were minimal to conserve fuel, and cleanup used almost no water. Every action considered the same priority: reach the next river or settlement with supplies still remaining. Eventually, the distant sight of greener land or trees signaled success. Travelers approached slowly, not rushing, allowing animals to drink gradually after long dryness. Rest camps were made nearby, and full recovery sometimes lasted a day before continuing. The relief was quiet, not celebratory. Survival on the frontier was rarely dramatic. It was simply the steady reward of preparation and patience. As evening settles over the returning grasslands and a gentle breeze moves through the leaves once more, the wagon stands beside real shade again. Water flows nearby, animals rest peacefully, and the journey resumes its calmer rhythm. Crossing the empty land has taught another lesson. Survival in the Wild West came not from boldness, but from careful planning and steady endurance beneath the vast and changing sky. After you have crossed open prairie and dry country, another challenge slowly rises on the horizon. And this one feels heavier, taller, and far less forgiving. The mountains of the West do not appear suddenly. They begin as faint blue shadows against the sky, barely noticeable at first, but day by day they grow larger until they dominate the entire view ahead. Reaching them is not the danger. Crossing them is where true patience is tested. Mountain travel changes everything. The ground no longer stretches flat and predictable. It climbs sharply, drops suddenly, twists into narrow passes, and forces you to move carefully where one wrong step could break a wheel or injure a horse. Wagons that rolled easily across prairie now strain uphill, and animals breathe harder with each incline. Speed disappears entirely. Progress becomes slow, deliberate, and measured. Before beginning the ascent, travelers lighten their loads whenever possible. Extra items that once seemed necessary are now reconsidered. Heavy equipment is reorganized so weight sits balanced. Ropes are checked again and again, because on steep slopes control matters more than strength. Some groups even double teams of horses for certain climbs, knowing the strain of pulling alone could exhaust an animal too quickly. Paths through mountains. Weather shifts quickly in higher elevation. Morning may begin clear, but clouds gather faster near mountain peaks. Sudden rain turns soil slippery, making footing unstable. Travelers watch the sky closely, because storms in mountains feel stronger and colder than on open land. When thunder echoes between cliffs, camps are set early rather than risk being caught on exposed slopes. Water flows more frequently in mountainous areas, but it often runs fast and cold. Crossing small streams is easier than wide rivers, yet slippery stones require careful footing. Camps near mountain streams are chosen on stable ground above water level, as melting snow higher up can cause unexpected rises overnight. Wildlife becomes more visible in these regions. Deer, mountain goats, and other animals move along ridges. While hunting provides food, travelers remain cautious, never straying too far from camp alone. Getting lost among similar-looking slopes is easier than on flat plains. Landmarks change quickly depending on your position, so mental awareness becomes critical. Nights in the mountains are colder. Even in summer, temperatures drop sharply after sunset. Blankets are layered thicker, and fires are built slightly larger, but still controlled. Wood is gathered early in the evening before darkness hides uneven terrain. The air feels thinner, and breathing becomes slower and deeper during rest. Despite these difficulties, mountain travel also brings moments of remarkable beauty. At higher points, looking back reveals vast land already crossed, plains stretching endlessly under soft light. Seeing that distance reminds you how far you have come, yet admiration never replaces caution. After each climb comes descent, and descending requires as much attention as climbing. When at last you pass through the final ridge and the land begins to slope gently downward toward new valleys beyond, relief is quiet and steady. There is no dramatic celebration, only careful recognition that preparation and patience have carried you safely through another demanding region. As dusk settles along the edge of a wide valley beyond the mountains, your wagon rests beside tall grass once more. The air feels softer, the sky broader again. Behind you, the dark shapes of peaks stand silent and still. Ahead lies new territory, yet your habits remain unchanged. Careful observation, steady movement, respect for terrain. In the Wild West, survival continues not because danger disappears, but because you have learned to meet each new landscape with calm attention beneath the endless western sky. By the time you have crossed rivers, endured dry plains, climbed mountains, and learned the quiet discipline of daily routines, you would finally understand something deeper about the Wild West. Survival here was never about being the fastest rider, the strongest fighter, or the boldest voice in a saloon. It was about endurance. It was about steady habits, repeated so often that they became instinct. The frontier did not reward drama, it rewarded consistency. You would wake before sunrise without needing an alarm, because your body had learned the rhythm of light. You would scan the horizon automatically, checking wind direction and cloud shape before even speaking a word. You would feel the condition of your boots, your horse, your wagon wheels, and your water supply without making a formal list. Awareness became second nature. The Wild West was not chaos. It was structure hidden inside wide open space. Settlements formed where water and trade routes met. Ranches spread carefully across grazing land that could sustain cattle. Mining towns appeared suddenly but survived only if supply lines remained steady. Everything depended on balance. Too many cattle stripped land bare. Too much mining exhausted resources. Too much pride led to unnecessary conflict. The land forced people to adapt or leave. You would also learn that community, even in distant places, quietly shaped survival. Neighbors helped repair barns before winter. Travelers shared information about safe crossings or dangerous weather patterns. Even in towns known for rough reputation, there were unwritten rules. Respect property, settle disputes fairly, protect supply routes. Without cooperation, isolation became dangerous. Law enforcement varied from place to place, but stability mattered to everyone who wanted business to continue. Sheriffs, marshals, and local councils maintained order, not through constant force, but through presence and reputation. The frontier matured over time, and settlements gradually became organized communities with schools, churches, and markets. Survival evolved from basic endurance into structured living. You would realize that surviving the Wild West did not mean conquering it. It meant understanding its limits, knowing when to move forward and when to stop, knowing when to speak and when to listen, knowing when to travel and when to build something permanent. The land did not belong to one person's ambition. It demanded respect from anyone who stepped upon it. And as your journey finally slows, whether you settle near a river valley, build a modest ranch, or remain a careful traveler, you carry with you every lesson learned along the trail. The steady packing of supplies, the careful crossing of water, the patience during heat, the watchful silence during night. Each habit forms a quiet armor that protects without noise. As evening settles gently across the open land one final time, the sky stretches wide in soft orange light. The fire burns low, not from urgency, but from comfort. The wagon stands still. The horse grazes peacefully. You are no longer simply surviving. You are living within the rhythm of the frontier. The Wild West was never just gunfights and dust storms. It was discipline, cooperation, endurance, and awareness. And if you listened closely to the land, moved carefully across it, and respected its demands, you could last far longer than a single day beneath its vast sky. As this journey comes to a calm close, and the firelight fades into quiet starlight, I hope this long walk through frontier life kept you steady and curious. If you enjoyed traveling slowly through history like this, take a moment to like the video, subscribe for more deep and immersive stories, and let me know which world we should quietly explore next. Until then, rest easy under the endless western sky, and I'll see you in another time, another place, and another long, unhurried story.